I'm recording. Okay. So we have the first part of test one on Monday, and then the following Monday, the second part. That was in the announcements, right? So we have those tests coming up, and that's labs 1 through 7. Then we did lab 8. And that is on fetching an XML file that's not on the test. I'm doing more stuff that's not on the test. And this subject is sort of, I don't know, purposely supposed to be a bit of a break. It's 2 labs, and there's no JavaScript. It's mostly just HTML, Scalar Vector Graphics, SVG. So this is supposed to give us a bit of a break while you prepare for the test. If you're prepared for the test, then it's a real easy break. And for the people who are a bit behind, some chance to catch up. But before I start talking about stuff that's not on the test, are there any questions? No. All right, so let's just start drawing pictures and having fun. All right. So that's going to my downloads. Let me open in code. I'm going to open up code to downloads. And let's look at Explorer, and it was SVG. And this is overkill for live server, but that's just the way I'm used to working. And so we're creating this, there's not an image, we are creating this image in code, but it is mainly HTML code. And so let's have a look at this. Okay, so here is what made those rectangles in HTML. So there was an SVG tag, a Scalar Vector Graphics tag. I specified the width and height and style of the tag. And there was an open and a closed tag. So that defined a region on the page in which I'm going to sort of make this picture. And then within this picture, when you are, let me do this just to get our orientation correct here. When you are working in anything graphical on the computer, you work from the top down. So this is your Y, and you work from the left to the right. So this is your X. And then so let's make them actually meet. So you work from the top down and X over. So I made a place to make my picture, and then I am making a rectangle. So I have the rectangle is a single thing. Yeah. It is X is 50. That means it was 50 over from the right. It was 75. That means it was 75 units down from the top. The overall region had a width and height of 500, but this rectangle has 400. And it is, I'm filling it in and with a dark red. It was really dark red. The first thing was really dark red. This is a little bit lighter of a red. Then I draw another rectangle. The order matters. The later a thing comes, it is on top of what came before it. So I made my overall area to draw. I drew the first rectangle in my space. I'm drawing now the second in line 20. I'm drawing the second rectangle on my space. It is on top of the previous one. And then it is 100 down from the top and 150 over from the side. And its height and width was 300. And then I drew my third rectangle, which was 150 down or 150 from the side, 225 down from the top, and had a width and a height of 200. And this was a, I'm getting going from dark red to a brighter red. And that's what it looks like. Okay. So when I give you this on a test, and I will in test 2, I will say the one lab is just for you to make something you want to make. And then the other lab is for you to make some design that I came up with. And that design was previously the SVG part of some test. So I will give you, I won't have you create a design. I'll have you create a design for lab, but I won't have you create a design on a test. But I will have you, I will say, I want, you know, a circle here or a rectangle there or a triangle. And so it's just about syntax, that you have to know the syntax. And you don't even have to memorize the syntax. You just have to quickly adapt to the syntax when I tell you to make something. So I will tell you, I want it to be this wide, this tall, and positioned here. And then you go from there. And if you're good, then you just sort of slap it down pretty quickly. So this is meant to be sort of like an easier thing for us to do, a sort of a bit of a break from before we get into something really heavy, which is React. Okay, so this was make a bunch of rectangles. That was our first example. My rectangles happen to be squares, but they didn't have to be. All right. My next, so that was SVG, which was the squares. The next thing I'm going to do is make a target logo. And that should be here in the Explorer now, target. It looks like the logo for Target. Okay, so how did we make that? There is, again, this time I gave it a header, standard old HTML header. Again, my SVG tag, I gave it a width and a height. This time it's a little bit taller. I gave it a background of FF, which is white. I am making, there's a syntax for a circle. A circle has the same height and width, but there's another thing we'll see later to make an ellipse, which you can make taller, or, you know, the width and the height don't have to be the same, but for a circle they do. So for a circle, you specify the center horizontally, CX, the center vertically, CY, and the radius. So this is, we see that these circles all have the same center, CX and CY. So these are concentric circles, but they have different radii. So the radii of these circles are getting smaller. So I have a white background, then I make a large red circle with a radius of 225. Then I make another circle with the smaller radius but the same center, so it's a concentric circle, and it is a white. And then I make a third circle, same CX, same CY, smaller radius, and I go back to red. And that gave me my target logo. And then I'm going to have some words at the bottom. So let me, there we go. Then I have a text tag. The text tag has an open and a close in this case. This I'm positioning at X of 50. That's sort of a horizontal positioning. A Y of 625. That's a vertical positioning. Again, we work from the top down. So this is down near the bottom. And I am writing in red with a large font size and in bold. And I'm writing the word target. I didn't fix the font family. So sometimes you can control the font family. That would be part of the style. And sometimes yours might look different from mine, in that if I didn't specify a font family and my browser's picking a default font family different from yours, then ours may look different. But if you really want control, then you would also specify the font family. Okay, so that was this target. So we saw the circles. Again, the order matters. If I reverse this order of these circles, if I put the big one last, all I'd have is one big red circle. They sit on top of each other. You can control that, but the easiest way to control it is just to put the stuff that's on top later. So there's a way to control that using a Z axis or something to add another axis to your picture and control where on the Z axis your thing is. But the easiest thing to do is just to put the things that are on top later in code, because that's automatic. Okay. All right. That was fun. Now, next. So we now have rectangles and circles and text. So now I'm going to add ellipses and arcs or something, or sort of. So I'm adding ellipses. So these are not circles. They're a little bit taller than they are wide. I think the first one might be a circle. And then I'm also showing you how to make this little smiley thing here. All right, here we are, inchworm. Okay. There's my inchworm. So I have my SVG is now a very wide. So it was 800 wide and only 200 tall. It had a background of black. I'm making an ellipse. This is the head. This ellipse happens to have the Rx and the Ry the same. So that's actually a circle. So the head could actually be a circle, but I made it an ellipse. And it has this very like neon green color. And so it was an ellipse. It had a center, X and Y, and was 80 and 80. So it was as wide as it was tall. And all these guys have the same CY. So their vertical centers are all the same. You can see that all the vertical centers are the same. The horizontal centers move on down the road. So it was this, the CXs are increasing, the CYs are all the same. The RXs and the RYs are decreasing. And I made the RY always bigger than the RX. So these are always a little bit taller than the RY. And they're all this very bright green. So that is the segments. So the one with the same Rx and Ry, that was the circle, that was my head. But it was a circle, but I used an ellipse. Then I had my segments of the body. Here's a little ellipse that is the I. Again, the CX is where it's located horizontally, the CY where it's located vertically. The RX and the RY are the radii of the ellipse. The X is smaller than the Y, so it's a little bit, it's taller than it is wide. And the I was black. The I was black. And then here's this thing called a Bezier. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That one is hard. It was black. And it had, this is where it starts. 130, 150 is sort of a starting place for it. And then the these Qs are how much it sort of changes. So first it says move to 50 horizontally, don't move vertically. So the line starts out sort of flat. And then it says go up to -30. -30 means move. Usually when we increase our numbers of Y, we're moving down. Because this number is, the second number is negative, we're moving up. And that is what created that, what I'm calling the smile. So there was this point where we started, which was here, and then we make 2 points. We make a point here, which is sort of 50 over horizontally, and then we make another point which is 30 above that, so that was the -30, and then we draw a line that sort of approaches that middle point. It starts off approaching that middle point, but then it veers off and heads towards the final point, and that's what's known as a Bezier curve. And you can have longer and longer curves, and it can keep going, but this was just a simple 3 points, draw the picture, be done with it. Okay. All right. So that was the worm. So now I've added ellipses and these paths. And the path is the hard thing. It's hard to work out the math of a path. I made a program just to play with paths. And so this says, Bezier, Bezier, Bezier. SVG Bezier, quadratic, here we go. So I made an interface where the user can put in where I'm going to start. I'm going to start at 100, 100, it says right now. I'm going to change 100 from the X and 100 from the Y. And then I'm going to have no more change in the X and go 200 in the Y. Okay, so here is the game. I started at 100 horizontally and 100 vertically. That was this first X. Then I said, go over another 100 horizontally and 100 vertically. That was this second red dot down here. Then I said, compared to the first point, these deltas are compared to the original point, have the same X. So I'm back here at the same horizontal position, but go down 200. So those are my 3 dots. My first one is an absolute sort of XY. My second thing is a change from that XY, a change in an X and a change in a Y. And then the second one is another change in X and change in Y from the original. So that's these 3 points. And then I start off making a curve that starts at the first point, heading towards the middle point, and then veers off and then goes to the last point as if it were coming from the middle. So that is the game of a Bezier quadratic. So you start off at the first point, you end at the last point, and the middle point is just something that you seem like you were heading to in the beginning and seem like you were heading from in the end, but you never really touched that point. And that was the idea that I used to draw my little smile previously. And you can have more points, but it's hard enough with 3, so I just left it at 3. And what did I do? So this was my interface. I had labels, I had inputs. You understand interfacing, we've done that a lot. This time I had some JavaScript because I'm getting code. I'm getting information from the user, so I must do some coding. So I'm getting when there's a button draw event, I add a click event to that. I have my inputs, and I'm giving them, if I change anything, I'm calling a function called clear path. So it's some of my usual interfacing. If I change this number, I clear out the picture. Okay. I have, so that is the clearing, any change of any input event to any of my input. So I have like number type inputs, and if any of them change, I have an on input change that calls clear path that gets rid of the drawing. I get all my data. These are numbers, so I have parse ints, and then I'm creating this path. So I'm writing some HTML and I'm doing a literal, a string literal here, and pasting in my variables from above. So start at mx, my, change the cues. Okay, that is what drew the picture. Here's, I'm making the little circles, which are my points. And then I have some lines from points to the other points. So the first thing I made was the curve, then I made the 3 dots, then I made the 2 lines. So that was fun. All right. You won't have to make an interface that writes CSV, SVG. You just have to make some SVG. There are on the internet SVG generators. So one, that's not going to do you any good for my test, because I'm going to say, I'm going to have some simple little design that I tell you to make. And then there's the make your own lab part of the SVG. And sure, if you sort of grab some image off the internet, turn it into an SVG, you'll look like a genius, except I'll know if when I look at your code, if it's you sort of by hand saying, okay, I have a circle and a square and I'm putting it here and putting it there, I'll know you did the real work. If you have some exquisite picture and a bunch of unreadable code, I'll know you didn't do it. I'll give you credit because I don't care, but it won't be additional practice for the test. The test will be you sort of putting images where, where I tell you to put them. So if you do the make your own design lab in the right way, you're getting some practice for the test. If you do it the wrong way, okay, you make a nice picture, but it's not getting you ready for the test. Okay. So will you get credit for it? Yeah, probably, but I will groan but you make me groan all the time. Okay. Lines. I drew a line in my quadratic Bezier, but I also had lots, but I drew that line in, or Java drew the line for me. Let me just draw a line in straight out SVG. So here's my optical illusion example. So optical illusion, here's the optical illusion. It's just a bunch of lines. Okay, so how do we make a line in SVG? A line is, you say I want a line, you say what's the starting X and the starting Y and the ending X and the ending Y, and then you give it a stroke. So you say maybe how wide you want it to be, what color you want it to be. And so here are the lines. The upper thing was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, and this other lower thing is also 5 lines. So here are my lines. This one starts at an X and ends at a larger X, and the Y's are the same. So that is, the Y's are the same, so that's a horizontal line. So that's the horizontal line through the middle. The next one has the same X and Y starting as the other one, and then it has a smaller X and a bigger Y. So that is down here, a smaller X. So the first one was the line. This one was a smaller X, which means it's to the left, but a bigger Y, which means it's below. So the next one is this stroke down here. The next guy here, again, started at 200, 200, and this time has a smaller X and a smaller Y. So that's the one that's going up. And then this one starts at 400, 200, and goes to a larger X and a larger Y. So that's going down. And then the last one is going to a larger X and a smaller Y. So that's going up. And then similar up here, except this one now goes to a larger X and a larger Y. So a larger X and a larger Y, that's this one down here. Okay, so you get the idea. A line is defined by a starting X and a starting Y and a final X and a final Y. And what next do I want to show you? My optical illusion. This is fun. No, that was the optical illusion, my pyramid. Pyramid, pyramid, pyramid. Here we go. So here's my pyramid. I'm introducing gradients and polygons. Okay. So here's my SVG. I am creating some definitions. Definitions don't draw anything. They're definitions of things that you're going to use. I'm defining my gradients. I have 3 gradients I am defining. I have this red to yellow gradient. I have a brown gradient that's vertical, and I have a brown gradient that's horizontal. My gradients don't have to be, my gradients can be at like 45 degrees or something like that. But I kept it easy for myself and made them vertical or horizontal. So here is my first gradient. I give it a name. Sure. I called it the vertical yellow to red gradient. So this is me giving it an ID. I have an X and a Y. I'm not doing anything with the X's, so I kept them both at 0. But the Y's, I'm going all the way from the smallest Y to the biggest Y. So I just made that percentages. So you can do things with, go to like 80% of something. I don't, that would just confuse me, but it's possible. And then I have these stops. So at the 0 and at the 100 stop. At the 0, I'm yellow, and at the 100, I'm red. So I'm changing vertically and changing from yellow to red. We saw that. So I'm starting at yellow and going to red. Remember, you work from the top down. So start at yellow, go to red. Okay. This next gradient, that is not, I use it in the drawing, but right now I'm just talking about the definition of the gradient. So this is like, you know, it's like a function or a class. It's just a definition at this stage. You got to sort of use it, call it in some sense. Okay, here's my vertical brown. I'm working vertically, so I have a 0 and a 100 in my Ys. And I start with at 0, a light brown, and at 100, a dark brown. And this is, again, the light will be at the top and the darker brown will be at the bottom. So that is this ground, the lighter brown at the top, the darker brown at the bottom. And then I have my third gradient, which is the same browns, but they are changing horizontally. So here, this time I went from X0 to X100. And that is these sides of the pyramid. Okay, so I'm making a rectangle of vertical red. 600, 400, start at the 0, 0, start at the top, start at the top left, go for the full width and go 400 down. That is that red sky. And again, the order in which I do them is the background to the foreground. So I make my sky and my ground. My ground was a brown. And here's me in the fill. I'm saying the URL pound vert red yellow. That's what connected me to this definition of, vert yellow red. And up here, that's connecting me. Pound means ID, and that's connecting me to this vert yellow red. So that indicating that the fill by this URL went up here to my gradient. It got and didn't make it a solid fill, but made it a gradient fill. Here's my ground, which was the brown vertical. And then my pyramid is 2 polygons. I have 2 triangles. And those 2 triangles share 2 sides. So you should see, and 2 of the XY pairs should be the same. So here is 300, 500, that's an XY pair. Here's 200, 450, and then there's 350 and 240. So the first point and the last point of my 2 triangles agree. And then this one goes to a smaller X, so that goes to the left, and this one goes to a larger X, so that one goes to the right, and I gave them the horizontal brown fill. And so that was, here's my triangle that goes to the left, here's my triangle that goes to the right, and 2 of the sides were shared. Okay, so that was fun. And don't tell me if my shading's wrong, it probably is, I don't care. Okay, so that's gradients and polygons. All right, what other fun things do I want to tell you? Letters, more letters but this time using some symbols. So I'm going to show you the Greek alphabet. And some weird spacing stuff. Okay. So I didn't want to do that. I want to do this. Greek, 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 Greek. Okay. All right. So I'm getting some Greek letters here. All right. So what did I do? I have a big text. So I have an SVG. I have a big text. There's the end of my text. Then I have some things within my text. So I have this thing called a tspan. So that's telling me this is something that's going to take up some space. And this is telling me where to start. So I went 50, 250, 450, 650, and then again. So that gave me my going across. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta went across the top. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta went across the top. And I spaced them evenly by saying 50, 250, 450, 650. So I gave them 200 between each one of them. Then in this next span for epsilon, I went back to 50 and I said, take it down. I didn't say what the y was. I just said, take it down. So dy, d means in like math, change. So we're changing the y. EM is a unit related to how big letters are. So I'm saying go down by like more than a letter space, 1.2 times a letter space. So that should make room for the letters and maybe with a little space in between. So here I am with going from alpha to epsilon with a little bit of space between the rows. And I'm using this notation for this HTML notation to get symbols. So if you have ampersand number sign, then you can give me the if it's a low enough number, ASCII, but crap, I can't think of the word. What's the higher numbers than ASCII? I'll think of it later. But these are the numbers. You can look up the number for a symbol. And if you want to get that symbol on a web page, you add an ampersand and a pound before it, and then the number and a semicolon afterward. So this was the symbol for a capital alpha, and so on. So the tspan allowed me to make my columns. The dy allowed me to move down a row. And this was how I got my symbols. Okay. Because you have to make your own, and somebody will want to make something for their sorority or fraternity or something. All right. And that was now dynamic. You don't have to do anything dynamic, but I wanted to have fun, so. This is dynamic in that it's generated dynamically, not dynamic in that it moves in time. So now this is back to some JavaScript. So this makes a page, but it's generated dynamically. So every time you refresh, it's a different one. It's got rectangles and circles. You can see that. And so there's nothing in the SVG. It's an empty SVG, and all the contents are generated in code. So I pick a random amount of red, green, and blue for the inside. I pick inner and outer amount of red, inner and outer amount of green, inner and outer amount of blue for the squares, and the same thing for the circles. So there's some inner for the squares, there's some inner color, and there's some outer color, and I'm varying between those two for red and green and blue, and then the same thing for the circles. So that's what all this crazy random stuff is. I've got nested loops to make this grid. And we've seen things like this before, except it's SVG is a little bit harder, but we've created elements before, but now we're creating SVG elements. And they're not as normal as our normal HTML elements. And so this is a little bit, instead of just creating an element, there's this little NS added in for namespace. And then we're making elements that belong to the SVG namespace. So it's not just normal HTML, it is this extended SVG HTML. And so that's a slight change from our normal generate something dynamically. And then we can set attributes here. So I'm making a rectangle, I'm setting its X, its Y, its height, its width. So I'm creating a color, I'm setting the color attribute, I'm adding it, appending it to my SVG. So that is the dynamic thing. All right, so that was fun, almost done. Now I'm going to make one that is in both senses dynamic. Okay. So this is TUS, okay. So this one got really fancy. Here I'm making an array of 2 arrays of circles. So I have circles that go in one direction, circles that go in another direction, and I'm making a grid of them. So it's similar to what I just had, where I made 2, there I made a grid of rectangles and 1 of circles. Now I'm making 2 of circles, but there's a timer and those 2 grids of circles are rotated in opposite directions. So I have this grid of circles, 2 grids of circles, and they go around in opposite directions. So there is create an element. You've seen create elements, set attributes. Again, the little weird NS for the namespace, so it's not normal HTML that we're generating. So we've got to specify the namespace of the things that we're generating, which is the SVG stuff. And then I did some weird styling here. So the styling has some sort of calculating in it. And so I'm using the rotation is done sort of in CSS, but in a CSS that's controlled by JavaScript. So that gets a little funky. I'll let you look at it if you're interested in, but this was meant to be an easy week. So I'll just leave that for somebody who wants the challenge of understanding it. But what you have to do, and this is 2 labs, so this is this Wednesday, next Wednesday, if you will. One is to make your own design. Just make sure you use some different types of elements. So you must have some changes in things. So you can't just use all of one thing, but not much to it. Use it 4 different types. So you can use rectangles, circles, ellipses, text, path, lines, gradients, polygons, or anything else you might look up. So long as you use 4 different things, doesn't have to look nice. It just has to have different elements, and you have to show me, you know, the syntax of different elements. Then there's the one which is more like what I would give you on a test. So after you've played around yourself, then think about this one. Could you do this? This would be like, you know, maybe at most a third of a test. And we have a 75-minute period. So what's a third of a test? Maybe 20 minutes at best, because this is the easy part of the test. So can you do this in, you know, 15, 20 minutes? Ask yourself after you've played around a little bit. Doing lab 9, I'm telling you here, like, I want a gradient, I want a triangle, I want a rectangle, I want a circle, I want them to be particular colors, I want some writing, I want some gradients. All you have to do is translate my directions into the correct syntax. So that'll give you an idea of, that would be test 2. There'll be an SVG part on test 2, and that will give you an idea of, you know, do you have enough of a handle on the syntax? And I'm not expecting you to memorize the syntax. It's just like, can you look up the syntax in the examples I gave you or the lab you did and adjust on the fly when I say I want these values of X and Y and widths and heights? Can you slap that into your SVG and get it to do what I've asked? All right, so any questions? No. So I'm going to stop recording. Okay.